Joining us now, MS Now senior Washington reporter and co-host of The Weekend here on MS Now, Eugene Daniels, senior writer at The Dispatch and MS Now contributor David Drucker, professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan, Justin Wolfers. You know, Eugene, this is quite the backtrack from the president just hours after his latest threats on Iran. What does all of this mean about the president's posturing at this point? What should we read into this?
That a lot of it is posturing, that at this point, and when I talk to folks in the White House and our amazing White House colleagues who cover this every single day and are at the White House every single day, what a lot of people are telling us is at the end of the day, Donald Trump is trying to force Iran into a deal, right? And I think he is miscalculating when you talk to experts, thinking that Iran only cares about oil, that they only care about the Strait, that they only care about Kharg Island. They aren't able to get their oil out anyway, right, when you talk to people. So that is not something that is keeping them up at night. One thing I think that is really interesting is that Trump has always been used to being the person who has the erratic behavior in a negotiation, right? He's used to being the one to get up at the table and walk out. He's used to being the one who says, I'm not going to do it, and everyone comes back to the table. But then when you're dealing with someone like Iran, where there's also some erratic behavior from their leadership and the folks that run that country, that's where he struggles because he can't get past, it seems, to another person doing the same thing that he's doing. I think one thing that's really interesting, I think something that I have my eyes on, I think the administration is trying to figure out is how can they get a better deal than the JCPOA. Some great reporting from our colleagues today, Julia Jester and Jake Traylor, talking about that. That at the end of the day, they're in the White House trying to figure out what is the off-ramp for Donald Trump that he can actually go around and sell, and something that isn't just what the status quo would have been post-JCPOA that he pulled out of.
David, you know, this is the president that said no new wars many, many times over, even though now he says he didn't say that. The on again, the off again, we're attacking, we're not going to attack. How are Republicans supposed to read this? Republicans on Capitol Hill, how are they supposed to handle this kind of messaging? And what does this say to the president's base?
Yeah, well, you really can't handle this kind of messaging because it's so unpredictable. But look, it's kind of like Groundhog Day, right? I mean, how many times have we been here before? The president either strikes Iran, orders strikes, or threatens strikes. Then he pulls back and says we're on the cusp of a deal. At certain points, he says we actually have a deal. Then we find out we either don't have a deal or we don't have a deal that's acceptable to Republicans on Capitol Hill, even though it may be acceptable to President Trump. And so I think we're going to have to wait and see here what we're actually dealing with. And I think given the pattern, it's simply impossible to know. Look, the president had a real opportunity, at least with Republicans writ large, to really gather a lot of support for the war in Iran. It's something a lot of Republicans looked favorably on, even though elements of the president's base were attracted to his no new wars promise. Many other Republican voters have thought Iran a menace, and there was a really good case to make for U.S. military action. The president never made that case. He never involved anyone on Capitol Hill, not Democrats, obviously, but not Republicans either, nor did he involve our allies. And that's why ultimately he's been alone on an island here, trying to find a way to extricate himself, as Eugene said, in some sense, to be able to say what I've established now is better than what President Obama established, but also in a way that does not cause further political erosion. And the one thing we could do that we haven't is launch more of a full-scale land invasion to take control of certain parts of Iran. That is the sort of thing that my sources have told me for months would cause a further political problems with the Republican base and the Republican Party, and leading into an election, it's simply not something the president has been willing to do.
You talk about political erosion, but there's also been, Justin, this economic erosion as well. And we saw the Dow shoot back up after President Trump made his latest comments about calling off these strikes. Is the chaos the point here? What does this roller coaster mean for Americans who are already struggling? How should they be reading into the numbers going up, the numbers going down, we're striking, we're not striking, and the economic toll that takes on them?
Is the chaos the point? I can't answer that, but I can tell you I can't figure out any other point. David Drucker asked how many times have we seen this where the president leans in, says we're going to bomb you tonight, and then pulls back. The answer is 5 times so far just over the past few weeks. In fact, I was looking, and so far during this war, the president has come out at a minimum 38 separate times and told the American people that we're on the cusp of a deal with Iran. So today, happy 39th. And given that track record, it makes it doubly hard for any of us to know what to do. It's clear that the president has been wrong 38 times in a row. And the question is he going to be right the 39th time? So when you're seeing stocks rise on this news, it's actually been the most persistent pattern we've seen through the war, which is every time the president de-escalates, American stocks rise. And notice they're even rising despite it's a de-escalation from a bloke who, only sometimes tends to mean what he actually says.
Why is that? Why do they rise? I mean, is there baked-in skepticism or, explain this to the layperson who's not always watching the markets. Why do the markets seem to be shrugging off this volatility?
Yeah, so really important point. And let me try and understand, because I think it really changes how you think about this war. See, the thing is, if Trump speaks and there's only a 1/10 chance that he's telling the truth, then you should only respond 1/10 as strongly as you otherwise would. What we've seen is Trump de-escalates and stocks rise. Every time he escalates, stocks fall. But they're discounting the possibility because he may just be spouting nonsense. So what that tells you is that these stock market movements are small relative to how afraid the market is of the war. This is the market saying fairly loudly and fairly clearly, even small changes in the probability of us being at war has a huge effect on the future profitability of American companies. And to be clear, they're saying that escalation and being at war is immensely unprofitable for American companies. And you can just think about the ripple effects that has through the rest of the economy.
And we talk about the alarm bells in the economy, Eugene, to the potential alarm inside of the White House. We have new reporting on the president's state of mind. Quote, people close to the president told MS Now that Trump has grown increasingly frustrated as he searches for a tangible victory to point to. Trump's annoyance, according to a White House official granted anonymity to share sensitive details, has reached an all-time high. What can you tell us about the frustrations inside the White House and the frustration the president's exhibiting behind closed doors?
Well, the frustrations have been rising, largely because the president has, as many people have said, I think even some Republicans would tell you, has miscalculated in a lot of his choices when it comes to the Iran war. One, just going there. So the frustration from President Trump is rising. He is then, as he always does, lashing out at his team to figure out an off-ramp. He needs to be able to, as I said before, sell something to the American people, sell something to Republicans, and sometimes more importantly for Donald Trump, sell something to himself as a win. This is the president, as a lot of presidents are in their second term, focused on legacy. Donald Trump has said over and over again that he wants to do things that haven't been done. So he wants to deal with Iran in a way that many presidents, he says, have wanted to do but weren't able to do. He wanted to do Venezuela because people have wanted to do, in his estimation, do that, and they haven't been able to do. And that's the same thing while we're watching Cuba. The issue with that is one of the many reasons why people did not go into Iran, other presidents, is because of the Strait of Hormuz issue. It is because of the impacts on the global economy, not just the United States economy. And his calculation here is that he can strong-arm anybody into a deal. And what he is finding is that that is not true when it comes to the Iranians. They have been very shrewd for a very long time. These are people who are very skilled negotiators. And the negotiators on the president's side, on the United States side, are people who have not done this. This is not the work they have been doing. They are not long-time diplomats in any way, shape, or form.